I never thought this could happen to me, but one day my whole world came crashing down. I had been working late for weeks, putting in extra hours to secure our future, to give my wife and kids everything they could ever want. It felt like I was doing the right thing, the responsible thing. So when I came home early one afternoon, I expected to surprise my wife, maybe share a quiet evening together, relax, and reconnect after all the time apart. But what I found was something I never saw coming. I walked into our house, my footsteps light as I approached the bedroom, thinking maybe she was inside, waiting for me. As I opened the door, I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There she was, my wife, in our bed, surrounded by not one, not two, but 5 different guys. They were all there laughing, talking, and touching each other in ways I never imagined. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't process the scene in front of me. It felt like time stood still, but in those few seconds, it was as if everything I thought I knew about my life was shattered. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, the betrayal so heavy I could barely stand. The room felt too small, the air thick with disbelief and confusion. How could she do this to me? How could she cheat, not just with one person, but 5? The thought of her, my wife, sharing herself with so many others was enough to make my mind race. I never thought she was the type of person to betray me like this. I trusted her. I believed in her. And yet, here she was, caught in the act, flaunting her disloyalty without any shame. For a moment I thought about speaking up, confronting her right there. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I turned and left, my legs shaky, my mind reeling. I needed space. I couldn't be around her or those men for another second. I walked out of the house, not caring if anyone saw me, my emotions a mixture of anger, heartbreak, and sheer disbelief. I drove around for hours, my thoughts tangled. I couldn't stop replaying the image of her with them, touching, laughing, acting like I wasn't even part of her life. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of mistake, maybe I misunderstood. But deep down I knew it wasn't. There was no mistaking what I had seen. She had betrayed me in the worst way, and now I was left with nothing but the aftermath of her actions. My mind raced through a million questions. How long had this been going on? Was I that oblivious? How did I not see the signs? But the hardest part was the realization that she didn't even care enough to hide it. That's what hurt the most. She wasn't ashamed or remorseful. She didn't try to cover her tracks or make excuses. She was so comfortable, so confident in what she was doing, that she didn't even try to protect me from the truth. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to hold back tears, but they came anyway. I was angry, I was hurt, but more than anything, I felt betrayed by the one person I thought I could trust most. I didn't know what to do next. Should I go home and confront her, or should I just walk away? At that moment, I had no answers, only the overwhelming weight of what I had seen. The days after that discovery felt like I was walking through a fog. I didn't know where to go, what to do, or even how to think. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, the image of my wife with those 5 men, their laughter echoing in my ears. It wasn't just the physical betrayal that stung, it was the emotional wreckage she left behind. The trust, the connection, the life we had built together, it all felt like it had vanished in an instant. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was living in a nightmare. For the first few days, I didn't confront her. I couldn't bring myself to face her. I wasn't sure if I was more angry or heartbroken, but either way, I wasn't ready to speak to her. I stayed away from home as much as I could, taking long drives or going to the gym, anywhere that kept me from having to think about what had happened. But no matter how far I tried to run, the truth was always there, haunting me. Eventually, I knew I had to face her. The questions were eating me alive. Why did she do it? What had I missed? How had things gotten so bad that she thought cheating with 5 different men was okay? I couldn't just leave things like they were. I needed answers. I needed to hear it from her, even if it would hurt like hell. When we finally sat down to talk, the tension in the room was suffocating. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I felt betrayed, and all I could think about was what I had seen. She started with excuses, as if there was some way to make it all okay. She told me that she wasn't getting what she needed from me, that she felt neglected, and that this was her way of coping. She kept saying that it wasn't what I thought, that it was just a one-time thing, and that it didn't mean anything. But none of her words made any sense. How could she justify what she did? How could she think that what she did was somehow okay? I couldn't believe a word she said. The more she talked, the more I realized that none of her excuses would make it any better. Nothing could erase the image in my mind of her with those men. She didn't seem to care how deeply she had hurt me. There was no genuine remorse in her voice. It was as if she was trying to convince herself more than me that everything was fine. I couldn't keep listening to her. Every word out of her mouth just felt like another lie. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had destroyed me, but I just sat there in silence, trying to hold it together. I didn't want to cry in front of her. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me weak. But inside, I was falling apart. The conversation didn't last long. There was nothing left to say that could change what had happened. We both knew it was over. The trust was gone. How could I ever look at her the same way again? How could I even begin to rebuild a life with someone who had broken me like this? I didn't know. I just knew that nothing she said would fix the damage. I was done. I couldn't keep living in this lie. So I did what I had to do. I walked away from that conversation with no intention of going back. I didn't want to waste any more of my life on someone who had already shown me they didn't care. I felt empty, but I knew it was the right choice. At least for now, I had to protect myself. The truth had come out, and I was no longer willing to ignore the reality of it all. The pain would take time to heal, but I knew I couldn't move forward with her in my life anymore. After everything I'd seen, after the deep pain that had settled into my chest, I knew I had to do something. It wasn't enough to just walk away and let her get away with it. I couldn't let her think that what she had done was somehow acceptable. There was no way I was going to let her destroy everything we built without facing the consequences. But I didn't want to make the same mistake she had. I wasn't going to lash out in anger or act impulsively. No, this was going to be different. I needed to make her understand, in the most profound way, just what she had done. At first, the anger was overpowering. Every time I thought about her betrayal, I felt like I was going to explode. I wanted to confront her, yell, scream, but I knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. It would only make me look weak, like I was still clinging to something that didn't matter anymore. So I took a step back. I let the emotions settle and I started thinking. Really thinking. I knew that if I was going to get my revenge, it had to be done with precision. It had to be something that would truly make her see the depth of her mistake. And more importantly, I had to do it without losing my own dignity in the process. I began by distancing myself from her, emotionally and physically. I kept my distance, not because I wanted to, but because I knew I had to. Every time she tried to talk, to explain, I stayed cold, indifferent. I stopped being the man she could rely on. I wasn't going to play the role of the forgiving husband anymore. She had lost that privilege, and I wasn't about to give it back so easily. Every time she looked at me with those eyes that once held affection, now filled with guilt, I turned away. But that wasn't enough. I needed her to feel it. I needed her to understand that her actions had consequences far beyond just me. I started focusing on myself, on making sure I didn't let this destroy me. I got into shape, spent more time with friends, went out, and made sure my life didn't revolve around her anymore. The more I pulled away, the more I could see how much she relied on me. She didn't know it yet, but she was losing her grip on me. She was losing her chance to manipulate me back into her life. The real twist, though, came when I decided to tell our kids the truth. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was necessary. They deserved to know what kind of person their mother had become. The look in their eyes when I told them the truth was heartbreaking, but also strangely freeing. They weren't just angry, they were hurt, devastated, and they wanted answers too. They couldn't understand why their mom would do something like this, and in a way, neither could I. But that's when things really started to change. I watched as they turned on her. They weren't just disappointed, they were angry. They had every right to be. She wasn't just betraying me, she was betraying them too. When she tried to come home to talk things through, they were the ones who made the decision. They threw her out. It was painful to watch, but it was also a form of justice. She needed to feel the weight of what she had done, and if I couldn't make her feel it on my own, At least my kids could. They had been through enough. It was time for her to face the truth of her actions and the truth of her consequences. I never thought it would come to this, but in the end, she had no one to blame but herself. I didn't have to destroy her. She had done that all on her own. I had only given her the space to make her own mistakes, to expose who she really was. And in doing so, I had reclaimed my power. She would never be able to manipulate me again. The days after the kids threw her out were strange, like I was caught between relief and an overwhelming sense of loss. I had never imagined it would come to this, but part of me knew it was necessary. Watching her leave, bags packed, head hanging low, was surreal. She wasn't just leaving me, she was leaving everything behind. Our kids, the life we'd built, the home we shared, she had thrown it all away. And in that moment, I realized that maybe I wasn't the only one who had lost. She had too, though in a way, her loss was something she had brought upon herself. She had no one to blame but herself for the situation she was in. As she stood there at the door, pleading with the kids, trying to convince them that everything would be okay, I could see the cracks in her facade. There was no anger left in her. It wasn't like the first time we argued, when she would get defensive and try to manipulate me. Now it was desperation in her eyes. She wasn't begging me, she was begging them. The children, who had once idolized her, now saw her for who she really was. The trust was broken, and there was no way to repair it. I had never seen them like this before. They weren't just angry, they were hurt, deeply hurt. And they didn't want her back. The look on their faces when they told her to leave was something I'll never forget. They didn't need to say much. The pain and betrayal were written all over their expressions. She didn't deserve their forgiveness, not after what she had done to them. She didn't deserve anything from them anymore. I watched as they shut the door behind her, their faces filled with a mix of sadness and anger. That was the moment I knew for sure that I wasn't going to be the only one bearing the weight of her actions. She left, and it was over. Or so I thought. The house, which had felt so heavy with tension, suddenly seemed empty, and for a while I didn't know what to do with myself. I still had to work through the anger, the sadness, the confusion. But I also had a strange sense of peace. The decision had been made for me by my kids, and it was final. There was no going back for her. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. A few days later, I expected her to come back, maybe with an apology or some attempt to explain herself, but that didn't happen. Instead, she sent me a message trying to tell me she had been wrong, that she wanted to make things right. But it was too late. The damage was done. I had no interest in hearing her excuses anymore. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, she was asking for a way back into my life, into our family. But I knew that wasn't possible. I couldn't let her back in. Not after everything. Not after seeing who she really was. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was everything that had led up to this point. The lies, the manipulation, the complete disregard for our family's well-being. She had chosen a path that led her to this moment, and now she had to face the consequences. I wasn't going to protect her anymore. I wasn't going to make excuses for her behavior. She had burned that bridge herself. When she came back to confront me, looking defeated and broken, I felt no sympathy. In fact, I felt relieved. She had finally seen the full extent of her actions. But that wasn't the end of it. She didn't get to just walk back into our lives like nothing had happened. That was a part of the story she would have to live with forever, and so would I. I wasn't going to let her forget the truth of what she had done. I couldn't afford to forget either. It wasn't until after she left that I began to see things more clearly. The anger, the pain, it was all starting to fade, but something else remained. A deep sense of justice. She had betrayed me, but she hadn't just betrayed me, she had betrayed everything we had built together. She had betrayed our family, our kids, and for what? A temporary thrill? It made me sick to think about it, but it also gave me the clarity I needed to move forward. I had already walked away from her, but now I had to make sure that she understood the full impact of her actions, and the only way to do that was to make sure she never had the chance to manipulate me or anyone else again. I spent the following weeks focused on myself, my kids, and making sure that our lives didn't fall apart because of what she had done. In the midst of everything, the one thing I had to accept was that I had to take control of the situation, not just for my own sake, but for my kids too. They had seen their mother, the woman they looked up to, betray them in the most unimaginable way. I couldn't let that be the end of it. They needed to know that they were not just victims in this. They were stronger than they realized. As the days passed, I started receiving messages from her. She kept apologizing, telling me she was sorry for everything, that she regretted her actions, and that she was willing to do anything to make things right. But there was no way I was going to let her back into our lives. The damage was done, and the worst part was that she didn't seem to understand the gravity of what she had done. She still thought there was a way back, like all it would take was some words of regret, and everything would go back to normal. But that wasn't how it worked. I had learned the hard way that forgiveness wasn't something that could just be given away. It had to be earned. But this wasn't just about forgiveness anymore. This was about making sure she truly understood the consequences of her actions. I had to make sure she would never try to worm her way back into my life or anyone else's again. Then came the unexpected twist that I didn't see coming. One night, after one of her many messages, I got a call from a close friend of mine who had been in the loop about everything that had happened. He told me something that left me stunned. Apparently, the men she had been with, the 5 that I had caught her with, weren't just random encounters. They had been people she had known for a long time, people who were close to us, people I thought I could trust. That revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. Not only had she been unfaithful, but she had been lying about who she was with and when. It wasn't just a one-time mistake, it was an ongoing betrayal, a secret life she had been living behind my back. I don't know what was worse, the initial shock of the betrayal or the realization that she had been so cold-hearted, so calculating. She had been playing me all along, pretending everything was fine, all while I was none the wiser. I knew that if I didn't take action now, I would be letting her off too easy. The truth of what she had done to me, to our family, had to come out. The secret life she had been living had to be exposed. The people she had been with had to face the consequences as well. So I made a decision to make sure everyone knew the truth, starting with those who had been involved. If she was going to live with the consequences, then so were they. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else forget the mess she had made. I had already seen the damage she could cause, and I wasn't going to sit back and let it go unnoticed. She thought she could erase the past with a few words, but the reality was far different. The revenge I had in mind wasn't about petty payback. It was about showing her that everything comes with a price, and she had a steep one to pay.